How to spot dumb specifications. This is a post for non-technical product managers, co-founders of software companies, and anyone who builds their own software product. I'm a software engineer myself, and I've led enough teams in my life that I would know what dumb specifications are. But I also want to encourage you to watch this video of Elon Musk.
The sort of 5-step process. First, make your requirements less dumb. Your requirements are definitely dumb. It does not matter who gave them to you. It's particularly dangerous if a smart person gave you the requirements, because you might not question them enough. Yeah.
This is his process. First, you go about making the requirements less dumb. Then you eliminate requirements that you don't need. And only then you make it more simple, you make it faster, and in the end you automate. What's important to know is that requirements are always dumb to some certain degree. So no matter who you work with, someone will always give you incomplete or dumb requirements. This is just a rule of this process. But there is one method we can reduce the overall dumbness of requirements is when we delete them. And this is one of the things that he points out. We should delete requirements that are not super essential, and we delete as many as we can. And we have only deleted enough if we have to add back around 10%. And also important to note is that this process, so going from making them less dumb, then deleting some, then simplifying, making them faster, and then automating, should not be approached from the wrong angle. So if you approach them from the bottom to up direction, you first automate and then you make them faster and so on. And in the end you delete them, because that might be something that shouldn't even exist. Okay, let's start with the first dumb requirement, and this is basically no requirement. It's just someone pointing at an existing software and says, copy this, or make it just like that, it cannot be that hard. There's a good clip from the Dumb Starbucks. It's a comedy show by Nathan For You, and it gives you a good perspective what happens when you just clone something. Usually those things don't work. And in general, if someone says just clone it from there, it's usually just laziness. And laziness can be there in multiple forms. For example, just forgetting something. Here, I found this thing here on Dribbble. If you see this selector, main technology, what does this button say? Show all. It was not specified. So someone might just make this because it looks nice and just out of sloppiness put in a show all, but doesn't specify what's behind it. How to spot such a laziness? Well, in general, I would say it's around 10%, the rule of 10%. So if you have a development time, let's say of 10 hours, you should have around 1 hour of specification writing or product ownership management on top of that, at least. If you have less than that, it might be that the person giving the specifications has not invested enough, has not researched enough. And there are a couple of things to fix that. For product managers, the easiest way to go about this is just to make breadboards. I have a video about this process, which is basically shows how you can use breadboards in order to make easier and faster software designs. And basically it just shows you a very simple way in order to specify what the user goes through when navigating your app. And for a developer, the result or the remedy of too little specification is just basically to make something very, very simple and then give it for review and just ask what else they should add. And the cheapest way to do this is just a click prototype. We have implemented that quite successfully in my company, where you just first ship a click prototype and then later on put the functionality into the backend. The next dumb requirement is something that just looks great if there is enough data in there. A lot of times UX designers as well and product managers, they would forget how a workflow starts. How does an app look like when there is no data inside? And so this is also sloppiness, because they have just designed the good case. They have not designed the bad case. What you can do about it, as a product manager, you just ask yourself, how many minimum entries I would need in order for this to look good? And how many maximum entries do I have? If you have the number of maximum entries, you would also solve this problem that we had earlier in this slide, where you don't actually know how many different programming languages you have here. And the real fix for that is just to work with real user data. Of course, the problem is if you don't have launched that feature yet, then you don't have user data. So the only thing you can do here is just launch it faster with less features and then slowly put eye candy on top of that. So in this case, yeah, you can just put a number in there and you can put a progress bar in there, but you don't need to have all these avatars. Maybe users don't even have avatars yet. So just leave that out and ship it in the future version. Another dumb requirement I have heard, because before I made this content, I asked my team members and asked a couple of friends. One told me this: somebody that wanted to contract them had just very bad expectations of the actual timeline, the cost of something. They want to have something called like an Instagram clone, for some internal use, and he wanted to pay $100. And so, of course, for $100, you cannot have an Instagram clone. You can maybe have something that's very cheap and AI generated. But when it comes to deploying it somewhere on a company server, that would alone be probably at least $1,000 or so. In order to spot it, well, you spot this usually by looking at the track record of the product manager and of the client. Have they shipped software before? Usually they don't. So I really guess that this person here never built a software, because they don't even know how much input is needed for a certain output. The other problem that can happen if that's especially a client, or if, let's say, you build your own software product, if you want to only spend, let's say, $500 on something, maybe you don't even know how to monetize that. And this can indeed happen. And if you're not confident about this, maybe don't build a software in the first place. Maybe it's much better if you just start with an email list or an Excel spreadsheet. The other thing that might also happen is that someone just has a very poor standard of quality. So maybe this is really just an image uploader, but shouldn't look like Instagram at all, or they don't care if it breaks after 10 images. This might also happen. I haven't seen that so often though. There's only one fix for that. Just run. Just don't work in that team. Don't take on that client. Yeah, it's easier said than done, of course. I mean, if someone only pays $100, that's of course not feasible, but maybe there's something that pays 1,000 or 5,000. Even then it could be a financial disaster to take this on. Let's talk about how they can fix it on their side. Well, if a product manager has those weird expectations, the simplest way is just to go through the development cycle once. Build something small and see how it felt, and see how much you put in and how much you got out. How does it really feel if you have a feature that's squeezed in and had to be done in one day? Is it good enough, or is it just not what you wanted to have? And yeah, it will also help if you see a project go over deadline, because that would teach you a lot about team management. I'm not saying everybody should do that. It would be better to just incrementally step up, and once something goes over deadline, just pull back and don't make that feature. I'm just saying, if you ever seen a team go over deadline, see the dynamics of it and see how much it costs in order to put something in, how long it takes, that would give you a new perspective on things. So I would hope that many product managers actually see something like this and be able to pull back. It would be good for overall software development projects. The next dumb requirement is when people have an idea how something could look like, but they didn't think about the backend processes or didn't think of any kind of edge cases. So in this case here, for example, it looks great when you start looking at it, right? So these are just tags and it looks totally fine. You select them and you can even add the custom tag, add something that you just thought about. Now there's a couple of problems. What happens when you click add custom? So what happens when you click add custom and then you add XML again? What if you add 100 items, and how does this list look like then? For example, requirements, programming languages, and all those packages here, there are probably thousands of them. How does this list look like when there are really thousands of them in there? So yeah, this can happen that a UX designer didn't think about all the edge cases. And how to spot this? Well, you can ask for certain questions in the conversation with the product manager, or in the conversation, if you're the product manager, with the developer. You go through the stuff in terms of how does a user go through the app, and what happens in any kind of edge case you can think of. You can even make a chart of them, like you have different user types. I should make another video about this, but basically, because us developers, we usually think about these things naturally. If you're a product manager, just talk to the developer. Hey, list me all the edge cases, and then I'm gonna then give them back to me, and then I think about them. This could also just help. There's another approach, which is in some scenarios is very feasible. You just start developing, and then you see when you run into edge cases. So this might be great if you don't have much data yet, and if you're very agile, but just make sure that this developing part is very lean and you get stuff done fast, and then you can iterate. Yeah, and how to fix it? Ask a lot of questions before any work is done. And if you are managing developers, just make sure you don't build abstractions in the beginning. Because if some developer says, I built this thing now so we can be faster later, if you see this, you need to have a deep discussion with the developer and make them understand that they know exactly what business you're in and that you need to ship fast. Usually developers can do that, but they need to know. In my case, I often just give people deadlines and say, okay, you think this takes 2 days? Okay, in 2 days, I'm going to call you and I want to see a demo. And if something doesn't work, that's cool. But at least the developer then had enough pressure in order to do it. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is contradicting specs. And this happens a lot when, especially German companies, start to develop software. They usually write these kind of things, which is a spec sheet. And this is in German. I'm sorry about this, but you just need to see the sheer size of this. And this is actually a spec sheet for spec sheets. So this is defining a workflow of how a software is being built. And this is already 72 pages. Yeah, of course, it's from academics, but people in the industry actually use that. And so it's not just that you have a spec sheet, you also have an implementation sheet, which is this one on the right here. And so I have seen this being built out to an extent where we had a 200-page spec sheet, and the spec sheet itself contradicted itself in between sections. And when we asked the clients, why is this there? They would always refer back to the spec sheet. And also we found out that the spec sheet was done by another company. So the clients didn't even really know what was inside there. How to spot it? If a spec sheet is larger than 10 pages, I would be very cautious. Maybe it can be 20, but usually it also depends on how dense the information is. But usually if you have too much and it takes multiple iterations to go through this, it is too much. And how to fix this? Well, you take the big spec sheet and you agree on a very simple first milestone. And I've seen this being done wrong multiple times, where the MVP is just still the finished product. So finished product is not an MVP. You need to really cut it down to something very simple and then iterate from there. And I would say the maximum development time is 3 months. So that's just my eye measure. One last note, even if you have great specifications, it does not mean that the development team will give you good results. A good developer is always more important than good specifications, because they can fill in the gaps. You can give them something half-baked and they would run with that and do something great from this. On the contrary, someone who is a mediocre developer, they would be able to work exactly according to your specification and then still ship something that does not work, does not meet your needs. And I've seen this multiple times. Just very important that you do this iterative process and make sure that you always have control over what's being built. All specifications are to some degree dumb, even written by the smartest people, because that's most dangerous, because you trust them more. So reduce the stuff, and then you would reduce the overall dumbness. If you want to see how to make these breadboards, you can check out this video, which I really like because it really helped us a lot in the software development process.